better business, and a better life begin here. Welcome to Business is Art on TrueChat with author and business consultant, John Umstead.
Hey, thank you for tuning in today. We are going to continue in Business is Art with a multi-part series that we began a few weeks ago, wherein we're talking about and looking at, is your business viable? Or product, your business or your product viable? Before you spend a lot of time and money and emotion and all of that good stuff in your business, you want to check it out and make sure that it's actually something that's viable, that's going to have a chance of succeeding. So this, again, is the third part. We talked about some questions you need to ask and answer yourself that are all about you. Then we had a second episode and we talked about some questions that you need to ask and answer that are all about your market. Now, today we're going to try to wrap things up and get to some questions that are really about your business model. So we had questions about you, your market, and now your business model. And back in the guest chair, continuing this conversation, is Justin T. Weller. Hey, Justin.
Thanks, John, for having me again. Looking forward to getting this wrapped up here and hopefully helping people make smart choices, right? I think that's the goal.
That's the whole thing. Make some smart choices. And hey, before we get into it, I do want to remind listeners to make a smart choice or two and contact us. Get in touch with us directly. Reach out to us on Twitter. You can reach me at John Umstead. Justin is out there as well. You're Justin T. Weller, correct?
Yep, that's the one.
All right. You can go to my website, plancanvas.net. That's PLANCANVAS.net, where you can see about some of the consulting services that I provide, as well as the Plan Canvas software that actually can help you answer some of these questions or document your responses to them. So go out there and check it out. But anyway, reach out to us and talk to us. We'd like to hear what you think about today's episode, any past episodes, what you might like to talk to us or have us talk to you about in any future episodes. So without further ado, let's get on into this one. Again, we're going to be talking about some questions that you need to ask and answer for yourself about your business model. And in no particular order, we're going to actually start off with questions around your organization. And the big question here is really, who is capable of doing what? And the big caveat is, and who's willing to do it. Right?
Yes, absolutely. I said that right before the show because right before we hit record, it is, I think, one of those things that people underestimate a lot of times. They think, well, I have the talent, but talent's only good if it's willing talent, right? So if they're forced into something, or maybe if it's not something that they're very passionate about, that can really handicap the whole thing.
It can bring it all crashing down. And the first little bit of word of advice when thinking about your organization, we'll get into a few more of the questions as we go. But first, I want to give a little bit of advice about defining your organization. So many times, especially small businesses, startups, even smalls that have been around for a while, tend to create organization structures around the people, right? So around the talent rather than around the need. And my strong advice is always define an organization that makes sense regardless of who's there. What are the functions? What are the roles and responsibilities? What are the skills? What do you really need to run this business? And figure that out first. And once you've done that, then you can start thinking about the people as well as yourself that you have on hand and what skills and talents and desires they have, and start properly fitting them into roles and identifying where you have holes in your organization. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that we bring it up because it is something that actually this past year, one of the things that I've spent time on is kind of going through the realization that the other founder of the company, who no longer works day to day in the company, amicable separation, but that really that position had been created for the individual.
Yeah.
As opposed to the individual filling a position. So in the process of searching for who makes sense for this role, I started to realize it's going to be pretty hard to find that because we've got this position that was defined by a person instead of the other way around.
Yeah, and that's exactly why you don't want to do it that way, because
that's right.
Now it becomes about the person.
Mm-hmm.
And that's exactly it. That person moves on, moves into other roles within the organization, moves out of the organization, what have you. And now you've got this impossible to fill role because they picked up pieces and parts just based on who they are. And, we don't clone human beings, right? You can't find their twin probably isn't in line to accept the job, right? So, so now you've got a problem. So, yep. All right. Well, there's a few questions here that you want to continue to ask as you drill down on this a little bit. And we alluded to a couple of them, but let's go ahead and hit them anyway. So one question is, have you actually identified what needs to be done? Not just the skills and the roles, but what actually has to get done. Along with that, you need to think about, what do you need to do in-house? You don't have to do everything internally. You can hire it out. You can contract it out, depending on your funding availability. But really think about those things that have to be done. And then the secondary question to that is what has to be done in-house, and begin building your organization that way. So, Justin, what's maybe 3 or 4 additional questions that we might ask as we're building out an org structure?
There's definitely a lot to go through, but the ones that kind of stand out to me as I was looking at, for those listening, John and I are referencing this wonderful PowerPoint that he's put together, because you did a webinar on this, right?
Correct. Yeah.
So,
that webinar, by the way, is available out at Plan Canvas. If they go, if visitors go to our resources page, you can find the webinar there.
Gotcha. So that'd be a good way. If you're really interested in some of the details that it's just not reasonable for us to try to discuss all of it without making it probably like a 10 or 15 part series. But the ones that really stuck out in this particular section are, why are they here? And do they know what they're supposed to do?
Yeah.
Because again, having a little bit of experience with this and having different people involved with the organization throughout its several years has definitely caused me to think more about some of these things prior to bringing new people on.
Mm-hmm.
What are they really, what's their motivation for doing this? Is it the money? Is it the passion? Is it to get to the next level? Is it a stepping stone? And not that any of that's wrong, but that I think it's so important to understand that. What's their purpose in doing this? Because it changes how, I would hope, how business owners are going to look at managing and working with that individual.
Yeah. Yeah. Not just knowing why they are there, but also making sure that they know what role they're playing. Again, particularly in startups and small businesses and even nonprofits, people come in thinking they are being hired to fulfill a particular role or job title or duties, responsibilities, and walk in to find that their conception of what they're supposed to do is completely wrong. And a lot of times the root cause of that is actually a very simple fix. And that is just write a job description. And a job description for each of these roles is not something that boxes someone in and says, okay, these are your duties. That's it. Period. You do what's in this box and nothing else. That's not what a job description is about. But it's basically to lay the foundation of these generally are your primary responsibilities. There are other things that are going to come along that you're going to need to do, but we really have to have you do these things. And if you've got that documented, then the candidate that's coming in to fill that role has a much, much better shot at being successful in it, which means they're going to stick around and they're going to help you to drive your mission home.
Yep. And if I think it's just echoing, if everybody's on the same page, it makes a big difference.
Yep, absolutely. And speaking of getting on the same page, we want to hear from our listeners out there. Join the discussion. Find TrueChat on social media at TrueChatORG, or reach out to me again on Twitter at John Umstead or Justin at Justin T. Weller. But reach out to us. We want to hear from you. Let's continue this discussion. We're talking about things to really check into, questions to ask yourself and answer to get some idea of whether or not your business is going to be viable. So again, we talked in previous episodes, questions about you, questions about your market, and now we're talking about questions about your business model. We just talked about organization. Let's move on to another broad category of question, and that is, do you have the necessary infrastructure? Right? So where are you going to be located? What kind of workspace do you need? What are your distribution needs? What kind of equipment are you going to need in order to provide your business service or product? So these are just a few of the questions to ask. Let me take a breath, see if Justin has anything to add.
I was reading through the questions as you were kind of making this transition for us, and I was just thinking about, again, one of those mistakes that was made. I guess not so much a mistake as even before we had Business is Art start, because the business we started was a hobby first, and I'm sure this is the case for many entrepreneurs, it's almost like you kind of fall into it being a business.
Yeah.
It's not a really, purposed process where I'm thinking about, we're going from hobby to business. And part of that was a testament to, I think, where you and I are sitting right now.
Mm-hmm.
You were here naturally before the renovation happened,
right?
And after, and it's a big difference to the effectiveness of what we do and the ease.
Yeah.
I'm sure you can attest to many technical problems that we ran into in the early days, and it's not that they don't happen now, but they're significantly reduced. And part of that is really understanding what is the right setup. What's it going to cost to spend the money I need to spend to do it right?
Right.
Because I'd imagine that a lot of people who have a passion for something I grossly underestimated that, and I think that it's easy for other people to do that too. It's like, well, I'll make this work or I'll make that work. And after you've done that for 6 months or a year, it's like, okay, I need the right thing.
Yeah.
I need the right setup.
Yeah. Yeah, where am I going to do it? It kind of comes first, and then, okay, what's it got to be, quickly follows. I had an interesting experience, going off the grid here a little bit, but not too long ago, I was one of the judges on a panel of judges for some pitch competitions, some pitch competitors. And the lady that won actually had a business that had been up and running for about a year maybe or so. So it wasn't so much a pitch to start up as it was a pitch to try to help get to the next level. And she was really inspiring because she saw a need in her neighborhood for a particular kind of business and just was drawn to that need. And it's something she really just wanted to do, had nothing to do with her career path to date. But it was something that she just really wanted to do, had a great passion for it. So she just, told her husband one day, hey, this is what I'm going to do. And he was like, okay, whatever. Right. And a few weeks later, lo and behold, they're going down this street. She sees this shop that was for lease. Wasn't occupied, and she looked at it and she just knew, and she said, stop the car. And she said, that is where my store is going. That is my store right there. And, I think he kind of looked at her like she was a little bit crazy, but she just knew that is where I'm going. Well, how are you? I don't know, but that's it. And we'll figure it out. But that's what, so she started with the idea and the location, and the rest came later. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah, that's, and it depends a lot too, right, on the type of business. I mean, all these questions are very particular to what you're doing. What it is for TrueChat as a podcast company is different than what it is for John Umstead, a consultant, is different for, a restaurant, is different for so on and so forth. Mm-hmm. So for some, obviously, I think it's going to be a lot bigger deal than for others. Yeah. Some new tech companies, the location is not as big a deal to them as maybe the back end infrastructure, the cloud services, that kind of thing.
Right.
But even companies that are starting now that, like a restaurant, that matters a lot.
Yeah.
I've seen great restaurant ideas in the wrong area, and it's sad because when everything else is right and you mess up one of these components, it's such a, not silly, but it's such a, mundane thing that you shouldn't mess up because it's a bad reason to fail.
Yep. Bad reason to fail. That's right. We've got a few more questions here on infrastructure. I'm going to just breeze over them very, very quickly and move on to the next set of questions. But, when we think about infrastructure, we typically think about that physical space. But just as you were talking about, Justin, right now, it's not necessarily only physical. In some cases, it's not physical space at all. It's really electronic space. So what kind of softwares and tools in that regard do you have, or do you have access to, or do you need? A lot of times you don't even know. You have to do a little research to figure out what it is that you need, and then you can start figuring out, well, which brand of that am I going to actually bring in house and use for what purpose? Website is should be considered part of your infrastructure these days. It's not physical space, but it certainly is part of your business infrastructure. So lots of electronic types of infrastructure considerations that have nothing to do with brick and mortar walls.
Yeah. Well, and if you're a brick and mortar store that requires people to come, you've got all kinds of infrastructure in your POS system, or other management style systems that you got to take into account because there can be big costs there. I know from having looked at POS systems that there's, any array of very simple and really affordable to really complicated and very expensive. And figuring out what you need for your business, you might not get it right the first time, but I think like so much of what John tries to get everybody to understand that I have to work on consciously on a week-to-week basis is you have to keep reassessing. Don't assume that it's always going to be the same. Because the stagnation is the enemy in this case of you don't want to just keep doing something just cause,
Right.
If there's a new and better way to do it, especially if it saves money, that's great. I was just telling you about a software change right before the show that, a company that we're dependent on, Adobe, who releases this audio software we use, put out a new process that reduces the work time for me and anybody else who edits at TrueChat by probably about 20%. And that's a real savings that can be realized. But if I had purchased the software outright instead of having this ongoing subscription, I would have had to pay, $400 or more dollars for the software. So it's one of those, we learned a while ago that the cloud version is what makes sense for us because staying up to date and getting those new features is important.
Yep. Yeah. And so for our listeners, they should get out there and look at some live examples like that. Everyone that's currently out here has gone through the pain already, made the mistakes. Don't make them on your own. Learn from folks that have already done it. And made those mistakes. Why repeat it? So, hey, this next topic, is really kind of, it's relative to TrueChat as well, because at TrueChat, all of the podcasts on our network pursue a common goal, and our mission is to educate people by providing honest, open, and respectful conversations. And so, hey, folks, if you have any ethical concerns with today's episode, please email ethics@truechat.org. Again, that's ethics@truechat, TRUECHAT.org. But the reason that's important is because this next set of questions is really all about what kind of support network do you have? And we like to think of Business is Art and TrueChat in general as part of your support structure. So, you're looking at things like what resources do you have access to where you can learn some things without having to fall down and learn it for yourself, learn from others' experience or mistakes or successes. So do you have a coach? Do you have mentors? Do you have an advisory board? What kind of relationships do you have out there? So really all about your networks.
Yep. It makes it's a huge difference especially when you're starting out, but on an ongoing basis. That's again, one of those things, particularly in this past year, there's been it's amazing how when a half, what we looked at internally as half of the business, being the other founder, when you lose someone who a position is built around, because there's, as you mentioned before, there's so many odds and ends that were tied up in that, that it really leads you to reevaluate a lot of things. And one of those has been, what kind of support network is there, who are the trusted advisors. And I think this is one that can be overlooked a lot. What kind of authority do those advisors have, if any?
Yeah.
We started out with a very authority-based advisor system, and since have moved further away from that.
Right.
But it's interesting. I've found that the less authority they have, the more I give merit to their idea just based on the idea.
Yeah.
Because, which seems counterintuitive, right? I mean, you'd think if they have authority, then, that changes things. But I guess part of that is you're not as defensive.
Yeah.
Because you feel like, they don't have anything to lose. They're not angling for anything. They're just helping,
right.
So I think that can make I think people have to evaluate that. I'm not saying it's wrong to give them authority, but you have to be smart about who you give it to, because you don't want to be immune to advice,
right?
Because of the advisor-advisee situation.
Yeah. And that's really the big kind of overwhelming question that's relative to this whole category of questions. Do you have a support network? And that is, are you willing to listen? It's just like going back to building that org structure. Do you have the people that are capable? Not quite enough. Do you have the people that are willing, right? Same thing here. You could have a fantastic support network, but if you're not willing to listen to what they have to say, then that network is really not helpful to you.
Right.
Right. So shooting yourself in the foot. Don't do that.
Yeah. It's basically like not having one.
Yeah.
I mean, what's the point in having it if you don't use it, and two, if they're not willing, to actually provide the advice too. I think sometimes people, that's another one. You have to think about those that you're going to do. Are they aware of kind of the role they're filling for you?
Yeah.
Because again, if they figure it out later and they feel like they've been kind of taken advantage of in some way, you don't want that either.
Right.
You have to keep that in mind.
Yep. All right, let's move on to another question here. It's a big, broad category that a lot of times is overlooked. A lot of times, unless a startup particularly is looking for an investor, they just don't worry about, do they have a pitch that they could ever give to investors? What's your Shark Tank pitch, right? I don't need one. I don't need any cash to start up, or I've got cash, so I don't need any more, or I'll just earn it as I go. I don't want any investor, whatever. That's still not a good enough reason to not be prepared to do a pitch. You want to be prepared to do a pitch, even if you think you're never going to give it. All right. So, it kind of goes to that old adage, prepare for the worst, hope for the best, right? Even if you're not planning to get investors, worst case scenario in that case might be that you need them.
Yeah. Yep. Exactly.
So act like you do. So some questions. You have an elevator pitch. You know what an elevator pitch is. An elevator pitch is just basically, if you're on an elevator between a few floors with a total stranger and they ask you what you're all about or what your business is all about, you've got just enough time to give them just enough information to let them go, wow, that's kind of interesting. I'd like to hear a little bit more about that. How can I get a hold of you? All right. So do you have an elevator pitch? Do you have long-term strategic goals and objectives, a long-term strategic plan? Do you have a 12-month business model, how you're actually going to operate and run the business in this next 12-month financial cycle? Did you document your assumptions, risks, and mitigation against those risks? When you're putting plans together, you are effectively guessing at what the future is going to look like. You're defining what you want it to look like, and you're guessing at how you're going to get there. Hopefully it's educated guesses and there's some real, thought put behind it. But at the end of it all, it's still a guess, right? You're crystal balling. And when you do that, you have to make some assumptions. So those assumptions do not come without risk. They might not pan out the way you thought they would. So if the risk occurs, what's the impact to you, high, medium, low. What's the likelihood that it's going to hit high, medium, low? All right. Now, how are you going to mitigate against that? Either to keep that risk from ever occurring or to minimize its impact once it does. That's risk mitigation. You need to do that sort of thing. And finally, you need to check your expectations. And when you're doing that risk mitigation planning, that's a really good time to do it. You think about what you assumed to be possible. Now do a gut check on those things, because entrepreneurs are notoriously optimistic, which is good. You got to be an entrepreneur, but you can be overly optimistic and really swing for the fences when there's absolutely no way that you're going to get there.
Reasonable expectations. Without allowing yourself to get too discouraged by the day-to-day.
Yeah.
I think there's a fine line there, which is what you were getting at, between you don't want to be blind by optimism.
Right.
Even if you're outwardly that way, and even if you got to wake up thinking that way to keep going, great. But make sure that there's documented somewhere assumptions that you feel good about.
Yeah.
That you feel like those are really reasonable.
Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of funny. We talk all the time on Business is Art about how this is really the core. This is the key. You've got to put these plans together. As painful as it sometimes can be, people just hate the plan. They just want to get out and do it. And I get it. But you've got to put these plans together. If you ignore this stuff, the fact is, the stats show over and over and over again that your business is twice as likely to fail if you don't do this stuff.
So do it.
Do it.
And increase your chances of succeeding majorly.
Yeah.
Bigly, right?
Bigly. And the thing is that we just, again, it's something I say all the time, but we just make it too freaking complicated. That's part of the reason people don't do this stuff is the stuff that we're typically taught is too complicated. It's too complex. It's not necessary. I literally just today sat in on a webinar. It was a free webinar that a major organization was conducting, that was called The Art of the One-Page Strategy. And it drew my attention for multiple reasons. One, my book is Business is Art. So anytime anybody's using art in a title like that, I'm curious, my eyebrows raise. And then they talked about a one-page strategy. Well, in Business is Art, I talk about a one-page strategic plan template. And then that's subsequently what we programmed into the Plan Canvas software is a one-page strategic plan template. Why? Because you don't need the complexity. There's just a few things you need to say and do and plan and track in order to have a very, very effective strategy. And so it was kind of funny, Justin, because as I was listening to this webinar, I'm like, I could be giving this webinar right now. And so it was both gratifying and frustrating.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's in having used your template for a business plan before the Plan Canvas software was up and running, I can attest to it was refreshing to not be overwhelmed by I feel like I can answer these questions. And part of the way that you have it laid out, I think is helpful too in constraining people from trying to go into excessive detail. Because the reality is most of us who are entrepreneurs don't have a whole bunch of money to spend on research and development to drill down that deep anyway.
Yeah.
So if we spend all this time drilling down, chances are we're making a lot of wrong guesses in those details because we just don't have the kind of resources you need to make those really specific predictions and assumptions.
Yeah.
So why do it? Why if you're eager to get out there and do stuff, then don't waste time doing something that if you don't want to be doing it anyway, keep it simple. Yep. Aside from if it's simple, you're more likely to go back to it and want to show it to other people. If it's really in the weeds,
right,
you're not going to want to show it to people because you're afraid people aren't going to get it.
Yep.
And maybe you don't even get it.
That's right. That's
confuse yourself.
Yep. Yeah. Well, hey, there are all kinds of additional things that, you need to be doing in order to really just validate your business idea or your product. in the first place. But what we've tried to do through 3 episodes of the Business is Art podcast is just give you some of the big ones that you really need to think about. You really need to ask yourself and answer. And don't just answer them for yourself. Run your answers by somebody. Go back to that network, those trusted advisors, your coach, your peers, whomever, and test those answers out on them. It doesn't mean that they are right if they're saying something different than you are, right? You may truly, genuinely have the answers. And at the end of the day, it is your business, not someone else's. And you're defining success on your terms, not on theirs. So you don't have to take everything that they say. And probably shouldn't take everything that someone has to say, but you do want to listen. You want to listen and learn and apply what you can to what you're doing. Do those checks and balances, make adjustments, and move forward and get out there and succeed. So that's it. We covered 3 categories of questions over these 3 episodes. We asked questions about you, about your market, and now about your business model. And Justin, would you mind giving just a real quick recap of what some of the big questions in each of those categories were?
Yeah, and definitely go back and listen to these other episodes too if you haven't. You can certainly listen to them, I think, independently of each other, but it's very helpful for the whole picture. When you we first have to look at yourself. What type of entrepreneur are you? Are business and personal vision, mission, and purpose in harmony? So important. How dedicated are you? And that's really kind of like the first tier. The first thing you got to focus on is yourself, because there's no sense in wasting time on your market or your business model until you can answer these questions about you. And then the next thing is, as I mentioned, your market. Is there a market for this? What a novel idea. Is it accessible? Again, going back to that initial, there might be a market, but can I get into the market? What's required to get into the market? And do you have a plan to go to market, a go-to-market strategy? And then the last thing is your business model, which is kind of what we looked at today. Who is capable of doing what? Do you have the necessary infrastructure? Do you have a support network that's going to get you through those rough times? Because they're going to be there. I can't imagine that you'll start a business where there isn't at some point a challenging time. And can you pitch it to investors? Even if you're not planning to, you ought to act like you are, because it's going to make you assess those questions. And those can really help you think about, am I doing the right thing with my business right now?
Right. Right. And for me, thank you for summarizing those. For me, there are 5 big points. So lots of good points in here, but 5 big ones. And so again, we're just going to repeat a little bit, but one of them is you got to know yourself. What type of entrepreneur are you? The next is, all of that proving out the product, proving out the market, all fantastic, wonderful. You got to do it. But you know what? If you can't access that market, who cares? If you can't access the market, who cares? All right. So accessibility, huge. Who can do the work? Great, wonderful. But who's willing to do the work? Not everyone is going to be willing to jump on board with whatever your vision is. So you got to make sure you are partnering up with, hiring, staffing, people that are willing to do what you need to have done. You need to listen. It's okay to have networks, but it's worthless if you don't listen to the people that are in those networks, right? Get their feedback, listen to them. And finally, can you pitch this thing? Can you pitch it? Doesn't matter if you never plan to pitch it to an investor or to a banker. Can you? If you can't pitch your business, you don't have a business, right? You got a hobby.
Yep. Couldn't agree more. If you can't sell it, then nobody else can.
That's right.
I mean, you're going out there and asking people to buy in, right? Customers. I'm not talking about investors, but if you can't answer the questions that an investor would want answered, you got to take another look.
Right. Yep. So there you go, folks. I hope this series of podcasts have been helpful. And I really do wish you all great success with your own businesses and product ideas. So get out there and get some. You can listen to TrueChat podcasts on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, and anywhere that fine podcasts are found. For Business is Art on TrueChat, I'm John Umstead.
And I'm Justin T. Weller.
Justin, thanks again for sitting in. Appreciate it.
Always a pleasure.
All right, and thank you all very much for tuning in. We'll see you next time on Business is Art. Be the change.